Good evening, and welcome to historic Faye Spanos Concert Hall for our Presidential Speaker Series. Thank you all for joining us tonight, and special thanks to Provost Ed Wells-Gilbert, who will be leading tonight's conversation with our very special guest. It is my honor and privilege to introduce to the Pacific community Dr. Cathy Davidson. Dr. Davidson is a true thought leader who has devoted her career to reimagining higher education in the 21st century. Dr. Davidson is a distinguished professor and senior advisor of transformation at City University of New York. She is the founder of the Futures Initiative at CUNY, which promotes equity, social mobility, and student-centered learning at every level of the university. Dr. Davidson is the co-founder and co-director of Haystack, the world's first and oldest academic social network. And she was appointed by President Obama to serve on the National Council for the Humanities and twice keynoted the Nobel Prize Committee's Future of Learning Conference. She is a distinguished professor emerita at Duke University, where she served as Duke's first vice provost for interdisciplinary studies, helping faculty launch more than 60 cross-departmental programs. Currently, Dr. Davidson is a visiting scholar at the Science, Technology, and Social Values Lab at Princeton University. The author or editor of more than 20 books, she is the only two-time winner of the Frederick W. Ness Book Prize from the American Association of Colleges and Universities. And yes. And just 48 hours ago, Dr. Davidson was awarded the 2025 Harold W. McGraw Prize for her groundbreaking contributions to higher education. On a personal note, Cathy's work, starting with her seminal book, The New Education, published nearly a decade ago now, remains the single biggest influence on my thinking and approach to teaching and learning in colleges and universities in the 21st century. Please join us in welcoming to University of the Pacific, Dr. Cathy Davidson.
Thank you and welcome. And thank you so much for engaging with faculty today. So I know you want to get started by welcoming some of our students.
Yes, I've heard that there are a number of students here tonight. Can you raise your hand? I can kind of see you. Can you raise your hand if you're a student? Oh, wow, that's great. I've also heard that there were some honor students that were a little worried about coming tonight because there's a very big test happening tomorrow. And I just wanted to pass on a little bit of cognitive neuroscience work about endorphins. If you're an honor student and you miss 1 hour of study before your test, it's not going to hurt your test scores, I promise. If you're anxious about the test, it might hurt your test scores, but that you're confident enough to be here tonight before a test, you're going to ace it. So I want to dedicate this night to all the students who are here. You're bold, you're confident, and boy, the world needs you a lot right now. So thank you so much for being here, and I hope you'll have some questions during the Q&A period.
Great. Well, thank you, Cathy, and I too thank the students for being here. So I'd like to get started by getting you familiar with the community, a little bit about your background and current interests, and what led you from your PhD in English to focus on pedagogy and student success.
Well, my PhD in English has never been a very conventional one. What I wrote, one of my first books was on how the world changed because of mass printing, which happened at the same exact time as the U.S. Constitution. Cheap paper, cheap ink, new printing methods suddenly made books available to middle class and even working class people for the first time in human history. Before that, you owned a Psalter, which is a prayer book, and a Bible, if anything. Suddenly you could afford cheap books, and it changed how information was conveyed. And it made people very nervous. Everyone was hysterical, like, oh my goodness, what happens if the common people can read books for themselves? It's going to change everything. It's going to be terrifying. It's going to ruin American society, et cetera, et cetera. And this is right when the Constitution is being formulated. In fact, the same printer printed the preamble to the Constitution, and printed the first American novel that's a protest against the Constitution. It's dedicated to the ladies of United Columbia. There's an abolitionist part of the book. It's got all of these things about people who were left out of the Constitution. So people were worried about that. When the internet came along, people were asking the same questions in 1993 when the World Wide Web was made available to people that they were asking in 1789. I started thinking about how we can think about information and communication technologies for now. And I started thinking about education. That was also an issue when printing came out. In fact, one of the ways that our society dealt with mass printing was public education, and deciding it was important to have free public education because now anybody could read. So I was thinking, what's an education for now? And I started really thinking about how to educate students, not for our past, but for their future. How the world changed. How do you educate students, not just for a changing world, but how to address change? How to be confident enough in their own abilities that when suddenly their job disappears, they have the confidence to relearn and continue to learn and be prepared for the next opportunity that comes along. That's a different concept of education than doing well on tests, than the standardized method of higher education that was invented very much for the industrial age. The kind of education we are experiencing that's traditional in our classrooms now pretty much is invented in the late 19th century, and very overtly to have a kind of education that prepares people for the brave new world of Fordism, assembly lines, mass production. It's a different world than we live in now. And so I became very, very obsessed with how we prepare our students for this world. And my ideas about career success are all tied to how you prepare students for their future, and how we as faculty members can be involved in that process as well.
So I'd like to build on that. Today you met with faculty and we got to do one of the engaging activities that you do called Think, Pair, Share, which I think a number of you saw at Convocation as well. And so thinking about how as faculty can we do this? How do we do engaged learning? How do we change?
So it's terrifying to most faculty to think about having to take their class, a class and content that they spent 7 years becoming an expert in, their discipline, their field, and turning that into something that seems vocational. I actually don't think it has to be vocational in a limited sense. There's an organization called the National Association of Colleges and Employers, NACE, and they've interviewed 3,000 employers and asked 3,000 employers, what do you want in a starting employee? What are you looking for in a new college graduate? Very little about career expertise and career disciplinary expertise. The things they want are excellent communication skills, collaboration skills. Business spends more money teaching people how to collaborate well than on any other aspect of management in the business world. How to interact well with people who are different from yourself. Basic technology skills, leadership skills, and a core of ethical values. I think there's almost no college class that doesn't deliver those things. But if you read the syllabi of most faculty, we talk about, first of all the rules, right? I think most syllabi read like a terms of service agreement, right? Where faculty are always complaining that students don't read the syllabus. Who would read that, right? I mean, all those pages and all those rules, right? We rarely talk about the deep learning that's going to happen in a classroom. So in the last book I wrote, we have a chapter called Group Learning Without the Groans. Because you tell students, we're going to work in groups today, and students usually groan. The smart students know they're going to be doing more than their share of the work. The other students are going to get cheated because they're not going to be doing as much. It's not as pretty. In fact, learning how to be a successful collaborator is an incredible job skill. And in fact, when you go to your first interview as a student, and someone says, have you had collaborative experience? It's great to say, yeah. I was that honors student who ended up doing the work for my group, my group project in such and such a class. That's a great thing to say in an interview. First, it's a little bit of a humble brag that you're with the person who did the work, but it also says you understand what collaboration is and you're making the connection from the classroom on. Every faculty member could go home tonight and add that to their syllabus and make the connections, or set it up as a game so your students make the connections between the things they're learning in the class, both the content and the methodologies they're learning. A research paper, right? Doing original research, synthesizing ideas is an incredible skill. It's one of those 8 skills that the NACE people found that employers want. We do this in our classes. This is what teaching is. It's what learning is. And in fact, it is the best jobs training we can give to our students without having to dumb down or change or anything that we're doing in our classes. And this is true of all disciplines.
So getting to the collaborative techniques, because I agree that, that we've all heard students face challenges with collaboration. What are some of the techniques that you get over that part of the one person who wants an A doing all the work, and what can faculty do to facilitate better collaborative techniques?
So I've done a lot of management consulting for corporations as well as for nonprofits and community activist groups and higher education. And one thing I like to do that I carry from that management training to my collaborations in class is I love people to get into a group and write job descriptions, literal job descriptions that each person in the group is going to have, and ones that play to their strengths of the students, but also that are necessary for the project to be completed. Nobody in the country but me likes badging. This is something I learned when I was involved with Mozilla, the Firefox people. I was on the board there, and they do a lot of open source collaborative work online, right, globally. And in badging, when you're working on a project with somebody who you might never have met, you might not even speak the same language, but you're doing coding together, some kind of a computer science project together, you give somebody a badge if they really shine. You never mark anyone down. You don't have to. You just give somebody credit if they do something you think is great. I like to do that in my groups because I like it when students recognize each other and recognize each other's excellence. You don't have to call it badging. You can call it just mutual appreciation and learning when it's not required, but I just like it when students realize somebody's doing well and note that in some way, in a way that I as the teacher get to see. It's a kind of accountability. It's an accountability method. It also means that students get to choose. So for example, I have students write job descriptions. Almost inevitably, they will add a couple weeks into a project, sense of humor. Because there's somebody who manages when everybody's thinking the project's falling apart, when everything's a mess, there's somebody who has a spirit and a sense of humor who can keep the group going. That almost always gets added to someone's job description later. And it kind of goes from being class clown to being, wow, I'm a great collaborator, which is a nice thing for people to find out about and to honor and realize how important those interpersonal things are to successful thinking and learning together.
Great. I really like how you think of faculty and students as partners in learning. And now that you've been here for all of a day, and you'll be here again tomorrow, you know that University of Pacific combines both classic liberal arts and professional education. And what do you think of that mix? And if you were a faculty or student here at University of Pacific, what would you recommend to students to get the most out of this opportunity?
I think it's an amazing opportunity. Professional school students tend to be a little older than a traditional college-age student. That wisdom, often they've been out in the work world, that wisdom can be a kind of inspiration and model to students. When I was at Duke University, I was a vice provost there, and my president, who'd made me vice provost, came to me and says, we have this new donor. She's never been a philanthropist before. She's really interested in getting her feet wet. She's a computer scientist by training. She has 3 degrees from Duke, and she wants to work with somebody in conventional, so we'd like you to work with her. And I said, who is this? And they said, Melinda French Gates. So I had the lucky opportunity of working with the richest person in the world, richest woman in the world. But she said she wanted to make a scholarship program that's actually the DNA of this institution. It was a scholarship program that put together entering first-year students with first-year graduate students and first-year professional students, because she said her education never made sense to her until she did an MBA at the same time she was doing her undergraduate, and she met people who actually had work experience. And that's what really inspired her own career. She was number 14 at Microsoft, so even before she married Bill, she had quite the career at Microsoft. So our program actually put together artificially, because that wasn't the same structure, as what you already have here. And I could see easy, interesting partnerships between graduate and professional school students with undergraduates for that kind of sense of what are you learning? And for the graduate and professional students, there's no better way to learn than passing on what you know to somebody else. So it's a really great synergy that's possible because of the unique nature of this university. I have to say, I've kind of fallen in love with this place. It's a Your president tootled me around in a golf cart for this afternoon, and I saw several of the buildings on campus. It's a beautiful, beautiful campus. The vegetation is beautiful. The buildings are beautiful. I love the library. We went into the library, and there are collaborative spaces. There are high stools, there are low stools, and there are these cocoons. And I said to your president, if I were a student here, I'd be one of the ones working in that cocoon. My best friend can only write when he's at a coffee shop. That to me is like a recipe to never write again in my life. But I love it that the library, and this to me is a great indication of an institution that cares about student success, right? Because here the library is planned for all the different possible kinds of learning and the different kinds of learning environments within one space. And it's not, I mean, it's a great space. It's just a welcoming, inviting space that doesn't say, if you're neurodiverse, I'm dyslexic. If you're neurodiverse, you're going to be in a cocoon. There's none of that. It's like there's a world of possibilities here because learning, we all learn and we all learn in different ways. That to me is a mark of a great university and a place that really cares about its students. Really impressed. I also love the Maker Lab, right? That had like 19th century fabrication materials and then 3D printing and other kinds of very cool contemporary things, all in the same space. And that's another one of those things where you collaborate partly by seeing differences and not disliking differences, but using those differences as inspiration to make something new and exciting. That to me is a key to learning for the future.
Thank you. Some of the things we talked about today were some of the great disruptors, and you've already mentioned some of the great disruptors in higher education. And one we talked about a bit is artificial intelligence and AI. And what role do you think it will play, and what should it play? And what's the role of students? How do we engage students in this?
So a lot of universities are making a lot of mistakes right now about higher education. Some are requiring every faculty member in every class and every student must be using AI. Well, that's fine as long as you've taken care of security issues, data privacy issues, all of the things that this generation of AI has not taken care of, right? In the history of technology, it's pretty rare to release a new version. AI is not really new. I mean, it was invented in the 50s. It's evolved in many ways. But this iteration of AI is something new. It's a different kind. It's a different scale. But it was released as a commercial product. It's Sam Altman's job to sell OpenAI, to do all the things you do as a great salesman. He was a dropout from Stanford, a computer science dropout. He dropped out after a year and a half of computer science. I don't know that he's a great coder, but he's a genius salesman. As an educator, do I want a genius salesman to be selling me a product that's going to change the lives of all my students and the way my students do everything? I got a text from my sister-in-law today. She's a librarian at Bryn Mawr, which is a liberal arts college outside of Philadelphia. Yep. She said the single question that she and the other librarians are getting now are searches for articles and books that don't exist. But that's something that AI is still terrible at. It generates fake references. So if you look at the citations, they look fine. And if you're a scholar in the field, you might be suspicious. But for most of us who aren't scholars in the field, we don't know that they're fake. But she says they're constantly saying, nope, that one's made up. Nope, that one's wrong. Nope, that one's gobbledygook. That one's invented too. And it's the single place that they're now finding the most traction in the library is telling people, no, that really doesn't exist. The documentation for that article, that paper you're about to turn in, that doesn't exist. So there are cautions. Do I use AI? Constantly, right? often as to find information that I'm able to fact check because I've learned the field. That to me is the heartbreaker right now. You learn by doing something, being challenged to do it, messing up. I talked to the head of athletics earlier today, and I said, I love athletics as a metaphor for learning, because we've all had to learn a sport, and you know you don't learn a sport by Googling, how do I do this? How do I play tennis? It does not teach you how to play tennis, right? You learn by trying, being bad at something, getting a little better. Once you get a little better, playing with somebody who's better than you are, who can challenge you. If you're just getting canned answers from AI, what you may be doing is getting an A on the paper if your teacher's not careful about it, but you're going to fail at learning. And the consequences of that are terrifying for the future. One of the places I do consulting work is in the country of Colombia. And Colombia is very, very impoverished, and its K through 12 system is not very well funded. And Meta, Mark Zuckerberg, tried out AI in education everywhere in the system of Colombia, K through graduate school, before any place else. This was about 3 years ago. And one university, they haven't published this yet, so I won't say which university, but one university very carefully has studied the results of the students who were given this free AI. And within less than 2 years, test scores in every field, in every age group, from pre-K to graduate school, had fallen by a half. That's pretty shocking. Now, I'm not a big standardized testing person, but that's a pretty good baseline metric for what's happening. Fortunately, they've now really engaged and are thinking of ways to use active learning along with AI to get the most potential out of AI and to learn with it. And now I'm going to tell a positive story. In the fall, starting next week, I get to be a visiting scholar at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, New Jersey. It was Einstein's hangout, and my address for the next semester is going to be 1 Einstein Drive. That's kind of fancy. I'll get business cards for that, for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Absolutely.
Some of the mathematicians there, and these are like some of the most famous mathematicians in the world, are very concerned about AI in education, and they did a very informal study, hasn't been written up yet, and they made it clear they don't want to be named with it yet. They're doing a controlled study now, but they were just looking at math scores and pre-med scores at a very fancy university and a more community college kind of university institution. And then they looked at this, they did the same exact class with the same instructors at both of those institutions, but with an AI advisor that doesn't give you answers but challenges you. So you put an equation out or a formula out, and you answer a question having to do with that, and the AI advisor says, yeah, that's okay. Now, what about this? And it gives you another problem to answer. In that situation, test scores dramatically, again, almost by a factor of a half, increased by using AI. But it was using AI not to answer, but in fact to challenge you and to create even better testing situations than our traditional forms of top-down learning. And basically, AI was serving the role of an active learning professor in a class. Now, my fantasy about AI is we've had this traditional form of education that we've used, top-down, professor lecturing at students, students writing exams and research papers, et cetera, since the last quarter of the 19th century. We need to change it. Right. And I know things like your first year experience are already doing a really great job of challenging that model and offering other and alternative models, which I'm very, very impressed with. That's a beginning. I wish all of education could change, and I keep hoping that maybe now AI is threatening enough and world-changing and paradigm-changing enough that more of us are going to take very seriously the call to think about real engaged learning, where every student becomes not just is learning from an expert, but learns how to become an expert. Right? That's a really amazing moment of empowerment when you realize as a student at any age, next semester I'm going to be with these smart people at the Institute for Advanced Study. I get to be a student again. I'm so excited about being a student again. But the moment where you realize I have the foundation to learn something and to feel confident being an expert, mini expert, maxi expert, some kind of an expert in that field, that's an amazing moment in anyone's life. And I hope that the crisis, the hysteria about AI might encourage more of us to explore different kinds of learning and teaching. And I hope that's the case. It's probably naive to think it's going to happen everywhere, but at places like this with your amazing student-teacher ratio, and every professor I've talked to, and I've probably met, 30 people today, 30 professors today, the passion for teaching and learning and really caring about their students' success, not just in their class, but in general at University of the Pacific and beyond, is pretty inspiring and amazing and unique. It sure doesn't happen everywhere, and you can almost feel it when you're in an institution where people care, and it's quite remarkable here.
Yes, I concur with that. One thing that we talked about this morning and that you've mentioned is that AI is moving fast, and some institutions are frozen in place, and some, where we're thinking about it and we're trying, but we're trying to also think, what do you do at an institution level? How do you get a conversation going? What do you even talk about? Because, as you say, there's like from fear to let's do this. And so trying to think up here about what do we do?
So we talked today, and I hope I'm not letting any cats out of the bag, about a possible task force on AI, faculty and staff task force on AI. And people said, what else do we need in the room? What else should we be doing? I said, first of all, it's phenomenal that this room has people from every field, people teaching first-year courses as well as professional and graduate classes, staff as well as faculty, different genders, different races, people from different countries, people with different areas of expertise. That's great. You need students in here, too. You absolutely need students in here, too. You need students thinking about this, challenging this. If I were running this, I would love to have internships for students, and maybe students being leaders on campus, maybe using social media, maybe running a student-run competition, saying what kind of rules and principles do we need for AI on our campus? I talked to somebody who's one of the administrators at our School of Dentistry, and they were talking about companies wanting to find out more information from their students that they can run through their algorithms, that they can train AI on. And he was like talking about HIPAA violation, right? Confidentiality violation. That's so important right now. How do you protect your students who are using AI? What kinds of rules do you need as an institution? I would love to have faculty, staff, students all thinking those issues through together. And I don't think there's one simple answer. Some campuses are doing things like every student has to put their phone and their laptop in a sealed bag, like you do for, like if you're out at a club at night, which we all know about going to going clubbing. It's so exhausting when you're clubbing every night to have to put your phone in a bag. I know, but that seems ridiculous to me, right? There are situations, all situations, and we do this in my programs, whether I'm teaching students or faculty. There'll be some moments where we're like, okay, let's just put all of our devices away and let's brainstorm and maybe even actually use our brains right now. And it's always different than what we would have come up with the laptop. And one of the things we do a lot in some of my programs, my student programs, brainstorm without the devices and then say, okay, this is what we've come up with. Now let's try our devices and see how well we did. See if we're smarter than these machines, or if they're going to teach us things we didn't come up with together. And I love to do it in that order, where we have the brainstorming first, and then we do the Google jocking or whatever we want to call that kind of searching. But to just to just decide you're going to ban the most exciting technology of the generation is basically saying, look at us, we are utterly irrelevant. Right? If you as higher educators are saying the only way we can deal with this is banning this thing that's ubiquitous, right? How could you be more marginal than that? How could you define your status more marginally than that? And that is not contradictory to me saying that if students only use AI, they're cheating themselves out of learning. And that's the kind of complexity of real world life, right? That's the world we live in, right? Those are the kinds of issues where there's not clear answers, and that's why we all have to collaboratively think them through together. If it's yes, I have a TikTok account. Yes, I have an Instagram, all of those things. My TikToks are the most boring, lame TikToks you can imagine. I wouldn't presume to talk to my students about what really is happening on social media. They have an intimacy and a depth of knowledge that I need if I'm going to really think about AI, but they have to be in that situation, they must be the experts and must be teaching me. And that kind of humility and collaboration, I think, is a key to collaboration. Like this, in this collaboration, you are the expert on this. This came out this week. I'm not going to say the thing. It's just too traumatic and upsetting for everybody. But it was interesting how quickly young people were able to identify things that the FBI couldn't. Just by being gamers, by being parts of gamer communities, by having a shared vocabulary, by knowing images, by knowing words, by knowing slang, by knowing quotations that were in key games. I know nothing about that, but I do know that my students know immense amounts about that. I've got some level 80 gamers in one of my programs. They know stuff that I can't even get the concepts. And I love to have them explain it to me. And in that situation, that's becoming an expert. In that situation, those students are the experts. They're telling me things, and things I need to know if I'm really going to talk about AI. As much as I need to know it from the Nobel Prize winners whose AI study groups I'm going to be in next week. I guarantee those prize winners don't know some of those things about what the mechanics of games are and what some of the logo, some of the lingo, some of the jokey practices that look like hostility or might be hostility. I don't know. I don't know those boundaries. Some of the hidden rules of gaming. My nephew is an incredible gamer, and when he talks about things, I don't know. I don't understand. It's like a different country, visiting a different country for me, but I know that I need him to know that so he can help inform decisions that I'm making.
As you noted here, we have a number of science students, and you've written a lot about STEM education within the work that you do. And I, as you know, I'm a scientist as well, and sometimes we talk about the tyranny of the content, like what do students need to know, and then how is that a barrier to some of the practices that you recommend?
That's such a great question. If as a faculty member you spent years and years of your life dedicated to a field and to mastering a field or a subfield within that field, it's really hard not to believe that everything you learned isn't crucially important. Also, rarely does a faculty member learn how to teach when they're getting their own PhD. It's rarely talked about. One consequence of that is we often replicate how we learned as graduate students in our classroom. Less than 3% of our graduates are going to go on to earn PhDs. Most faculty reflexively, we can break our habits, but habitually and reflexively teach as if we're still training people to go on to have PhDs. Not to go into fields that might have nothing to do with the fields we're teaching, but that in fact might learn from some of the deep, deep meta issues that are key to our programs. So I love to challenge faculty to change their syllabus and write something at the syllabus, on the beginning of the syllabus, that isn't about the rules and regulations or even about the content, but it's almost like the effective reason for taking this class. Like if you take this class in mathematics, you're going to learn a level of abstract thinking that whether you take another math class in your life is going to help you understand a world of abstract thinking. It's going to be a very important, a kind of precision and meticulousness that's going to be very helpful to you in the rest of your life. Group learning is another one of those things that if you're working in groups, this is something that will help you in the rest of your life. The content part isn't very important in the end, except in some specific situations. If you're teaching a pre-med class and you know your students are going to go on to take the MCATs, you might as well just bring in the MCATs so students know what's on the MCATs and really be looking in that very instrumental way. Often people who are training students and are very worried about you used a great phrase, tyranny of content.
Tyranny of the content.
The tyranny of the content, who are really worried about keeping the content, will also say to me, I hate vocational training. Well, if you're worried about the tyranny of content, you're doing vocational training. You just are doing vocational training in a vocation that most of your students aren't going to go to. So you're doing irrelevant vocational training, right? That's not very satisfying. So learning how to step back a bit. Here's a great trick I learned from a colleague. She said, I've never taught a semester where I haven't had to call off at least one class because either I was sick or my childcare failed or I had to go to a conference. I started calling people from the Career Development Center and saying, would you mind going into my class today and talking to my students about resume writing? This is a Algebra 1 class, or this is a class in data visualization, which is something I often teach. And maybe you can make a connection between what we're doing in the classroom and resume writing. But even if you can't, I'm not going to be there today, and it's better than giving them some fake at-home assignment. What we found, one person suggested this. CUNY, where I teach, has 26 different campuses, 240,000 students. So when this came up, I thought, wow, these overworked career counselors are going to hate us for suddenly telling faculty they should be calling them every time they need someone to fill in for a class. Turns out the career counselors were happy because they often will work very hard to put on a program, and 5 students will show up at the program. This is taking their knowledge and actually going into a class where they might be dealing with 60 students all at once. So it's effective for them, and it's incredibly effective for the students. We've got the research on this, only about 24% of students nationally ever go to their career counselors before the last semester of their education. You shouldn't be going to your career counselor your last semester as a student. You should be going your first semester. Actually, it'd be a great thing to put into your first year experience. So you can start seeing how everything you're learning is a potential thing on your imaginary resume and often on your actual resume. I also help students do things like take what they've done in a classroom and think about how those are skills that are transferable skills that they can put on their resumes. Skills that they can put, other skills that they've learned, collaborative skills, cross-cultural communication skills, basic, things that are listed on their CVs, which are useful, and people pay attention to that. Employers pay attention to that.
So one big final question before we open this up to the audience for questions. So some pundits are saying that college isn't worth it anymore. We know from your writings you disagree, but can you tell us as higher educators, people at a higher education institution, what you think we can do about communicating the values of higher ed?
When I talked about that AI task force that you're thinking about, somebody in the room came up with this great idea. They said, don't call it an AI task force, call it the Futures Academy, which I think is a brilliant name for it. We talked about bringing students in. It would also be great to bring in members of the community. Have some forums where members from the community talk about how they're using AI in their classrooms, and not in their classrooms, in their occupations, in their labor force. Students will learn from it, faculty will learn from it, the community will learn from it as well. That's the kind of thing that travels.
Yeah.
And brag about it after you've done it, right? Don't only do it, but communicate that you've done that. And that, in fact, the role of community in campus is crucially important. There is no statistic about the difference in the rest of your life between having a college education and not having a college education. I wish that weren't the case. That's not true. My father actually got his degrees while I was getting my degrees. He had something wonderful called the GI Bill and thought he was going to be inheriting his dad's business, and instead found out he was a very, very talented engineer and ended up getting an engineering degree. And when I graduated from 8th grade, he got his diploma. When I graduated from high school, he got a master's degree. It was a very big deal in our family. I just interrupted myself.
It was about the future of higher education and the value of
Yes, I wish that we treated people without college degrees as well as we treat middle-class people. Minimum wage in our country has not changed since, is it 40 years now? $7.25? That's really quite appalling, right? There are some great paying jobs out there that you don't need a college degree for. In general, you earn about $2 million more over the course of your life with a college degree versus not having a college degree. Health outcomes are better. Marriage outcomes are better. There are just many more opportunities for personal satisfaction, more flexibility. However, we also live in a time which in all human history has the greatest wealth disparity. Fewer people having enormous, unimaginably huge amounts of money. And it does seem as if globally, not just in our country, but globally, there's a movement to shrink the middle class. So a lot of I think it's propaganda against higher education is partly about wanting to make a smaller middle class, right? We all remember this from high school history. The whole change of the 19th century was the birth of the middle class, the growing middle class. Higher education system we inherited is about a growing middle class. Manager jobs, middle manager jobs, office jobs, bureaucratic jobs, professional jobs, right? Graduate school didn't exist before the 1870s. There was no such thing as graduate school. You learned by the apprentice method. All of this is part of industrial age education. There is definitely a tendency now to want to shrink the middle class. That isn't just shrinking college and anti-college, but also paying people less, right? If you change the whole configuration of a labor market, that also means more exploitation of workers. So end of sermon, but I think that college is not only worth it, but it's very, very important for communities to realize the benefits of college. I bet, I don't know this, but I bet that there are lots of free events on campus that the community is invited to, and the community is free to come to. You don't have to be a student here or a faculty member here to come. Do more. Invite more people. Invite schools, teachers to bring students to events. Have, things like that really can help town-gown relations, I think, are incredibly, incredibly important.
Well, thank you very much, Cathy, for our conversation here. And now we'd like to open it up to questions from the audience. There are 2 microphones right near the front here. And again, we'd appreciate you going right to the microphone so everyone can hear you. And lights,
I hope some students will ask questions.
Yes, exactly. But right now we have, you can see someone. Oh, there's one in either question. Either one.
Okay. Hi.
So
I'm Mehdi Ghazali from School of Engineering and Computer Science. Thank you for the great workshops and inspiring dialogues. My question is about...
He's
I'm here.
Yeah.
So we are, I think, in the best student-centric university in the nation, and I believe on this one, and we partner well with our students. But it looks like we need to be partnered with AI now and new technologies. So with everything now is changing, these emerging technologies. So what advice you have for faculty to how to best prepare students for the future that it's lots of uncertainty in it?
Thank you. It depends on what the class is and what the level is, but I would say creating a climate where students are critical about the technologies they're using, whatever the technologies they're using, and using them as creatively and helpfully as possible. So partners rather than substitute for actual learning. And working through different assignments, different ways of running your class so that the technology is there, almost like I use the example of tutors, that the mathematicians at the Institute for Advanced Study had done a situation where they were using AI as questioners, not as answerers. Situations like that, I think, are the ideal way to use technology in a classroom. But how you do it varies very much depending on what the subject you're teaching is and what level you're teaching.
Now over here.
Hello, my name is William Alvarado, and I am a student at the Conservatory of Music. And I just wanted to say thank you for sharing that you are dyslexic, and I just wanted to know what kind of advice you have for somebody to advocate for themselves if they have learning differences.
Oh, thank you. So I'm old enough that dyslexia wasn't really invented when I was in school. I just thought I was I just thought I was a rebel, right? Because I do some things very well. I was a math geek as a child. I won a big national scholarship to math camp, and I still can't add. So it's now when I was on the board of, I shouldn't say that. Let's just say many of the people who invented the internet add just as badly as I do. It's kind of a point of pride, in fact. I don't do arithmetic. I just invented the internet. I don't do arithmetic. Actually, when I was teaching at Michigan State, I got my PhD insanely young. I didn't like school, so I did it very fast. I love teaching, I love learning, but I'm just not cut out for sitting in a lecture hall. It's just not my thing. But my friend was taking her 6-year-old to a reading specialist, and she said to me, why don't you come along? And I came along, and I walked in the door, and the psychologist said, you better take these tests, too. I mean, she knew immediately, and there's something called diagnostic relief, where suddenly your whole life makes sense. And I thought, wow, I could read when I was 3. I still can't read out loud. It's very hard for me to read a prepared talk out loud. I think the biggest thing, and musicians and computer scientists often are those are my people. I mean, they often have different ways of seeing the world, which are tremendous gifts. And we don't know yet enough about human life to know, the human brain, to know if that tremendous gift is like the reverse side of what we think of as disabilities, right? So much of what we think of our disabilities are only disabilities within a very industrial question and response, one-way kind of learning. I think the single most important thing for learning disabilities is, again, diagnostic relief, having some professional say, yeah, you have ADHD, whatever, and then finding out what that means for you. The particular, every dyslexic is dyslexic in a different way, right? It's a term, I'm sure in another generation we'll have multiple terms for it. These are very crude terms. But learning what is best for you, like the library, knowing I need to work in a cocoon, or I need to work with 3 other friends at a high-top desk, or with the sun in a place where there's natural light, all those things matter, and we've got lots and lots of research on that. Knowing what's best for you is great. I recently had a doctoral student say to me, I work at 3 to 5 in the morning, and I'm going to learn to be a normal person and work regular hours. I said, you're going to kill it. Why would you do that? If you know about yourself when you're most effective, value that and treasure that knowledge. And feed it in any way you can. I mean, your partner might be mad at you for staying up at 3 in the morning. You might have to make some compromises. But fighting for the way that you learn, being your own advocate for the way you learn, I would say is the single most important thing for those of us who are lucky enough to have learning disabilities. Thank you for that. Thank you.
Hello, thank you for coming here. My name is Nevleen Carr. I'm a student, and thank you for shouting us out. I had a question about, in the beginning of your speech, about mutual appreciation, the badging. You mentioned how that we should focus more on mutual appreciation instead of marking down points. And I kind of wanted to talk about, do you believe it is better to focus on collaborating skills and mutual appreciation rather than harsh grading or docking points? Does grading remove the development of these mutual appreciation skills?
So the mutual appreciation was within the specific context of collaborating on a very complex project. And it's a little sneaky, because in badging, when open source programmers do badging of each other, they never give somebody a failing grade, but they don't give you a good grade unless you've earned it. And believe me, if you're working with 4 people, and I have my students talk about, before they actually work on their projects together, talk about the week's collaboration and look at who's badged what. If you're in a group and everybody else is getting little stars or whatever, however you want to badge from the group, and you've gotten none, believe me, students take that very, very seriously. No one's failed them, but nobody's appreciating what they're doing, too. And students will often come to me and say, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm really missing here. Nobody thinks I'm doing any contribution. And we'll then talk about that contribution. So it's not the same as lowering standards. In fact, I personally think it's raising standards, because it's really easy to fail. It's harder to do something well enough that other people recognize it. And most of us kind of thrive on recognition, right? Failure can often have that opposite effect, as somebody who's failed a lot, where you just get defiant, and instead of hearing feedback, you resist it. I would say that in a good collaborative project situation, and I think any learning situation is collaborative. If you're working with a teacher or somebody who knows something you don't yet know, it's a collaboration. It's an exchange of knowledge, an exchange of what I need to know, what you know, what I think I already know that you're not giving me credit for. You know, it's a very complicated dance back and forth. It's not letting somebody off the hook, but it is saying, show me your stuff so I can appreciate it. And sometimes it's actually raising the bar, not lowering the bar. But it has to be done with respect. If you don't have respect as your bottom line of working together in a community, nothing works, right? Disrespect, I think disrespect is up there with shame. And this is just from reading a lot of psychology books. It's up there with shame as one of those things that will kill motivation faster than anything. If I feel disrespected in a situation, my motivation is dead. And that's powerful for teachers. Because we've all, as teachers, been schooled in failing people. We've been schooled much less in respecting and recognizing people. Although, again, I've met teachers here, professors here, who love their students. So, you know, and love and respect they're not the same thing, but it helps. It helps. Thank you.
Thank you
for
so
that
much.
question.
Hi, my name is Anna Ald. I'm a biomedical engineering student
Yay.
here.
What a great field.
Yeah, it's awesome. When you talked about AI, you spoke a lot about data privacy and fact-checking and learning, which I understand is more relevant to your field, but I'd also like to know your thoughts on how AI affects artists and creativity as well as the environment, and if you see any solutions to those issues.
Wow. We haven't even begun, not even begun, to think about two special issues with AI. One, the depredation to the environment is colossal. The amount of energy that's taken for any diddly search that I'm doing on, how do I get from my apartment to the Empire State Building? Because I'm totally direction tone deaf, and just how I make that work. Oh, direction tone deaf that's a transliteration of a Japanese term, hokoonchi in Japanese. That was very funny. Isn't it direction tone deaf a great metaphor?
Yeah.
It's perfect. So the terrible cost to the environment has not been put into we all hear about it, but it hasn't been accounted for in any significant way, which I think is so irresponsible, so insanely irresponsible. Second one is labor practices. People are being paid minuscule amounts of money to pretend they're AI or to manipulate the resources that AI is being trained on or to do many, many other things behind the scenes with AI. The exploitation of people globally is shocking. And neither of those issues are people really coming to terms with in a big way. So if I were having a task force on AI, I would also want to look at those global issues. And I'm really glad that you're bringing them up. The artist one is a third one. The first copyright laws are passed in the United States because of mass printing. So when we have mass printing and the whole world is changing about who has access to information, three things happen. Copyright laws to protect authorship and who is an author and who is, so you can't just plagiarize from another author. Public schooling, advocacy. Thomas Jefferson becomes a huge advocate for public schooling as a way to combat what's called print mobocracy. The third one's a kind of a sinister one, and it's coming back again. John Adams was so worried about print mobocracy that he passed the Alien and Sedition Acts of 1798, one of which says if you print something that's distributed to a larger group and it's considered to be dissent, disagreeing with the powers that be, you can be deported or incarcerated for doing that. That law, Jefferson won his election as the third president in retaliation, because people hated that law so much. That was his campaign. One of his campaign pledges was to get rid of that law. It's only been invoked twice since then in American history. Once was in McCarthyism, and once is in the last 5 months. So that's a real issue as well. What's the role of censorship in all of this? What's the role of deliberate misinformation in this? What's the role of paying people terrible, exploitative wages to manipulate the data that's then being distributed mainly through mass media at a global scale, stealing artists' work without giving credit to those artists, and possibly for very nefarious purposes as well. What laws do we need? What practices do we need? What education do we need to deal with these issues? I believe in the UK, and somebody correct me if you know this and I'm getting it wrong, faces are now copyrighted in the sense that you can't just steal someone's likeness and put it in some bogus AI animation or something as if they did something. They have a right to their identity, in other words. And that's very interesting legislation. We're not even close to that. And in fact, one hears that there's billions of dollars being offered to elected officials to not regulate AI on any of the things that you mentioned. Intellectual property, environment, and then I added labor to the three. But those are global issues of massive, massive ethical concern that we should all be thinking about. Thank you very much for that question. Really important.
Thank you.
So we have time for one last question. Those of you who have questions, if you want to write on a card, Cathy will get back.
And I know it is 8 o'clock, so if you have a class or something, please feel free to leave.
But we'll take one last question.
Hello, Miss Cathy. My name's Cameron. I am a sociology undergrad student and currently working on a thesis around research within LLMs and the privatization of them in education. My question to you is, how do you engage when the system from its conception is privatized and built off hostile scaffolding?
I heard part of that, but I couldn't get all of it. How do you, a system that's privatized and?
Built off hostile scaffolding. Anthony Carr's idea of how technology builds outwards, AI from the conception was used for the insurance agencies for probability predicting, so it falls to not acknowledge human agency.
Okay, so then the second part of that is not an area that I feel expert in at all.
Understood.
Right, it's something I would have to, the privatization?
Yes.
As I said, it's one of the first times in human history that a technology has been released as a product to be sold. And I think we all have to be very, very worried about the snake oil possibilities for a product being sold. People are making enormous amounts of money in ways that they're legal because we haven't regulated them, right? There's no regulation. So I think it's a vast and very, very important concern. And I'll learn more about that second thing that you said later on. But thanks for bringing that up. I'll add it to my to-do list. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, I'd like to thank Cathy for a wonderful discussion tonight, so please join me.
Thank you. Thank you.